Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 2. I'm your host, Sylvain Perrier, group leader at Vertus. So there's a moment that many founders reach when nothing's wrong, the business is healthy, they have great customers, they're buying more, not a lot of support tickets, which is very rare in our industry. Product stable, the team is aligned, it's strong. But the work feels different. It feels a lot different than what it used to. And guess what? That moment is very rarely discussed amongst founders. It's misunderstood. And most of the time, we just don't give ourselves permission to discuss it. Well, guess what? Today, we're actually going to make that big leap of faith and have that conversation. So a little bit about this show. So this podcast is for founders who've built these great, durable businesses, and they want this clear understanding of long-term ownership without the pressure. Zero hype is my philosophy when it comes to this show. No sales pitches. So this episode today is called The Quiet Moment That Every Founder Reaches. It's not an episode about selling your company. It's about recognizing that really important inflection point that all founders at some point or another arrive at. Most of the time it's silent. You're alone. You're not talking to someone. When the relationship between you as a founder and the business really starts to shift. Now, this is a big topic, specifically for episode 2 of our new podcast here at Vertus. And so to help explore this from an experience point of view, an operator at heart, I've asked Zach Plener, our Senior Director of M&A from the Vertus Group, to join me. Now, Zach has spent years in the trenches working with a lot of owners, founders of businesses who have made that courageous leap to sell their business. And I've asked him to join me today, kind of tackle this subject. Zach, thank you for joining.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I have this question, and when I was kind of writing out the show notes and kind of thinking through how do we approach this subject, and you've talked to, I would suspect, is hundreds, if not thousands, of owners and founders today, given the size that we are here at Vertus and Jonas, that is part of Constellation. Describe to me in your own words, what are the conversations like that these founders are having at that pivotal moment? What are they saying? Like, what are you picking up when they're talking to you?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think with all the founders that we speak with, they're all at different stages of the, call it, business life cycle. And I think that's really the interesting part about it, is whether they're in the heavy hyper growth stage or whether they're in the maturity stage, or even if some are in the decline stage, the conversations are really similar amongst the three of those stages. So as I think about what consistently comes up in all these conversations, it's a lot of just casual conversations. It's a lot of listening from our side to really understand where their business is at, how they feel about them, and what they see the challenges are. And what we'll find is, while every founder will discuss their challenges in a different light, or really depending on what stage they're at, they'll outline their challenges very differently. At its core, I think that each founder is really determining what is the next step. And I think that's where these conversations are super, super important. And that's why I like, in our first conversations, really just gearing down and understanding where the business is at and how the founder views their challenges, so that we can really assess and figure out if we can help them, how we can help them, and really what our role is to play. Because they're going to speak with hundreds of people just like us who are all doing the same thing, who are all looking to acquire. And I really think it's important for them to have a deep understanding of what their issues are, so that they can assess whether we're the right acquirer for them.
Do you find that more often than not, they're coming to the table with a kind of preconceived notion that they're ready, or is it more they're exploring of what life looks like post selling their business?
Yeah, I think that naturally when we make the phone call, people's brains will jump towards, okay, what is next? What is what does this mean for me? What can Vertus Group, what can Constellation do for me? So I think naturally when we make the phone call, their brains will go towards that. But I think very quickly what we try to do is really kind of take the conversation away from acquisition and more towards business specific. So, Sylvain, you've run and operated and worked in many businesses in your past. And I think what we try to do is just develop a deep understanding. So while the conversation always starts with, okay, you're an M&A, you're an acquirer of software businesses, what does this mean for me? I think where it ends is very, very different. And where our conversation almost always ends is about the operations of the business. Because what we're really trying to get to the bottom of is, can we help? How can we help? And if the answer is that we can't help, then we're very honest about that too, because we don't want to mislead and we don't want to pull someone in. This is a massive moment for founders and for operators. And the last thing we want to do is lead them in a direction that we can't fulfill our promises with. But I'd love to hear your perspective too. So you, coming from an operations standpoint, having sold some businesses in the past as well, is there inflection points that you've seen as you've been through the process? And with these inflection points, do you find that it's a conversation about synergies and M&A activity, or more so just about business fundamentals and operational challenges?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. I wasn't expecting so. No, it's a valid question, because in my world, I had spent 21 years. I'd spent 21 years ago. I had founded Mercatus Technologies and wasn't contemplating an exit. And I've always been a firm believer that at some point an acquisition finds you or an exit finds you. But what I wasn't ready for at the time, and I think all operators and owners of a business to a certain extent, their heart and their soul permeates itself in the DNA of the business that they built. And disassociating yourself from that can be challenging, because you don't know what your identity is the next day. So if you know that's the emotional state you're in as a founder. And so for me, it was a phone call. It was a phone call on a Saturday. And the business was growing, but we were finding lacking on the product set side. And so the acquirer had ability to bring new technology to the table. We equally had talent and technology. When combined, made a lot of sense. What was for me less of a challenge from an emotional perspective in rationalizing it was time to transition. And this is why I really appreciate the way Jonas and Vertus operates, is I was permitted to stay on board and operate as a global chief operating officer. So really kind of focusing on my passion and my purpose and bringing the pieces of integrating a series of businesses together to further grow them. And so if I look at what we do on a day-to-day basis, and I think why we're so able to approach it candidly and honestly, when those, the founders and the operators of a business reach that inflection point of thinking, okay, what's next, is the fact that you can stay on board. You can continue running the business. And what we'll do is we'll surround you with the talent at the table, right? Finance, HR, legal, operations, and so on. And that makes a fundamental difference.
Yeah.
Right.
And one of the words you said stuck out to me is focus. And I really think that's core. And as a founder is going through the process, I think the key question they have to ask themselves is, where do I want my focus to be? Because a lot of the times a founder is involved in every aspect of the business. And very few times are they working on the business, they're working in the business. They get pulled into finance objectives, they get pulled into technology, they get pulled into sales, they get pulled into customer support. And it's hard to ask the question of, okay, where do I want my focus to be? And my hope is that we can provide them with that focus of, where do they want to specialize and where do they want their core activities and their core focus to be post-acquisition? And I think that's a key question for every founder to ask themselves, to answer, what do they want to do? What do they want their focus to be? And that should almost dictate the acquirer they go with. Because at the end of the day, yes, everyone's going to do their math and come up with a valuation, but it's also a life change. It's a big life change for all of these founders. And what they need to ask themselves is, what do I want the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, or however long to be? What do I want it to look like? And what do I want to do? And each acquirer is going to come with a different set of challenges and different expectations. So I think that's a really important question they have to ask themselves too.
Well, I start to wonder in your conversations, at some point, there has to be this secondary inflection point that these founders start to realize maybe the maturity of my skill set versus the maturity of the business and the opportunity for the business to further grow. They realize, okay, it is time to kind of go to the next level. Are you seeing that in your conversations?
Yeah, I think that there's like that specific inflection point of, how do I take the business to the next level? How do I, grow geographically? How do I expand the product line without deteriorating current customer relationships? I think there's a lot of questions that arise from that standpoint, and I think that takes a few conversations with us. And I'll be fully honest, that takes conversations with our experts. So what I am good at is numbers, and what I am not so good at is technology. So what we try to do is pull in the right people that can be better equipped for these conversations, whether it's a tech expert or a sales expert or a finance expert, so that we can really understand those challenges that we had touched on at the beginning. And as we think about what those challenges are, where is the business maybe lacking? Where can we put some juice into the business so that, whether it's fueling technology or fueling their sales team, what have they been struggling with, so that we can help direct them and get the business to a better spot? Because it's all focused. The founders are working on 5 different departments, and at the end of the day, it's not sustainable forever. So it's about, how do we equip them with the right tools so that the business can be successful in all 5 departments?
Yeah, there wasn't, in my experience, there was no, first of all, there was no skill set in terms of around the table that it
Mm-hmm.
would be the same team post acquisition. So the relationship was highly transactional in that sense. And because it was highly transactional, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, I think it's a reality, but there was no rationalization of, okay, is what I'm feeling and where I see my involvement in the day to day moving forward, does it make sense? And I think that was kind of, for me, as kind of having realized, hey, I think it's time for me to pursue something entirely different. I just wish there would have been someone there to say, to acknowledge, hey, you're thinking, what you're thinking is exactly what other founders are thinking when they decide to sell their business, but also let us guide the thinking in a very unbiased, neutral way.
Yeah. And together, right? How do we come up with a solution together? I think is one of our core philosophies. We're not going to have all the answers. And our hope is that by mixing, call it just the software background, software expertise with the specific vertical niche expertise and the industry expertise, you put those 2 things together, can we map out a plan of how do we really take this business to the next level? But I would agree, like it's absolutely a common theme amongst all the founders that we speak with. And I would say that there's no catalyst on those things. It's not like they have this moment of, okay, it's time because, I really think that I can, Vertus Group or Constellation or another buyer can help me with items A, B, C. I think it's a mixture in many conversations. So I would say we speak to founders probably for months before even talking about an acquisition. We just spend time understanding, asking questions, and really just game planning together if it makes sense.
Like, let me ask you a question. So let's say you have a buyer that's listening, or not a buyer, but an owner out
Mm-hmm.
there right now listening to this podcast, healthy business, growing, great customers, great products, and kind of realizing, yeah, I think my sense of purpose is waning away from the business. I think it's time.
Mm-hmm.
What do you advise them, if they were to reach out?
Yeah, so I'm biased. Obviously, I would love every business to sell to us, but if I'm thinking realistically, the advice I would give to any buyer is to experiment, to talk to people. You said it at the beginning, like, if by no means would I make this a plug. I think that we are the right acquirer for some businesses, and I think we're the wrong acquirer for others. So I would encourage every every seller to just experiment, talk to people, gain the insight. And at the end of the day, I think what's really important is finding an acquirer they can trust. Now, I always say this internally that I drink the Kool-Aid of what we're doing. I really think that what we do is special and important, and I think we treat people genuinely and in the right way. But I think it's important for the seller and for founders to find a buyer that they trust, one that's going to fulfill on the promises they set forward. And it's just as much an interview on the seller's side as it is on the buyer's side to see if that natural fit is there.
Absolutely. Well said. And we do care about people. I mean, I think that is very much core to who we are and what we do here, especially people that have just spent sometimes majority of their lives building something that they care deeply about. So how do people get a hold of you if they want to ask you follow-up questions?
Yeah, so I love having these conversations. So little quick background, like I used to work in accounting and then I came here and I was never a salesperson, nor did I ever work in sales. And I still am a numbers guy, but I started to have more of these conversations and I just really enjoyed it. So I would always encourage anyone to reach out to me, whether we have an off the record conversation. I'll provide my honest feedback, whether it's valuable or not. Hopefully I can provide some value, but I'm happy to have a conversation really about anything. And I'd encourage people to reach out to me on LinkedIn, and then you can get my email from there. And we just set up an introductory call and go from there. I just love learning about businesses. So hopefully this translates into a few phone calls and a few conversations that can help me further learn about some other people's businesses.
Zach, thank you. Officially guest number 1 on the podcast. Pleasure having you on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Make sure to smash the like button and to follow us on your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube. And maybe on Netflix, who knows? Maybe the powers that be will let us host our podcast on Netflix. Join us, episode 3. We're going to be tackling a different subject, and it's going to be focused on when the founders start to think about the long term. Thank you, folks.